Hey, hello, everybody. It is 12:15, so I think we will get started. I would like to begin by welcoming everybody both here in the room and also on Zoom to this seminar in the Peking University School of Transnational Law, Law and Humanities Seminar Series. My name is Norman Ho, and I teach at the law school. And we're very privileged to have as our guest speaker today, Alex Green, who serves as Associate Professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong Faculty of Law. Professor Green works in the areas of international law, including public international law, legal theory, jurisprudence, political theory, law and political theory, and also within law and the humanities, especially law and opera and law and music, as today's seminar makes clear. Professor Green, before he taught at the Chinese University of Hong Kong Faculty of Law, he taught in various UK universities, including the University of York and also Leeds Beckett University. He is the author of a book entitled Statehood as Political Community, International Law, and the Emergence of New States, which came out with Cambridge University Press, I believe in 2024. Professor Green today will speak to us on the topic of Towards a Wagnerian Jurisprudence, Legal Meaning in the Musical Works of Richard Wagner. He will speak for about 40 minutes or so, and after which we will open the floor for questions both in person and online. So Professor Green, it's great to have you here, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Norman, and thank you very much for PKU for hosting this seminar. Now, this is a bit of an odd project. I was talking to Norman about this before we commenced the seminar today, in that it's often a bit of a hard sell for academic lawyers to stand up in front of a room and say, well, I'm going to talk to you about late Romantic German opera, because unless you've sat through Wagner's Ring cycle, you don't really understand the nature of law, or at least not yet. That goes down like a lead balloon, as you would imagine. But I think one of the things that I would like to come out of this project, and what I'm going to try to do, is give you an overview of the larger project today, rather than run through the detailed arguments of any particular paper or theme within that project, is the idea that there is at least as much legal philosophical meaning to be found, not only in the librettos, but also in the score, which is to say the music, the auditory or sonic experience of great musical works, as there is in more traditional prose-based forms of communicating legal ideas. So that is, if you like, the overarching methodological theme of the project. But there's also a substantive one, in that Wagner himself, who you can see pictured in the background on this slide, was quite a deep and certainly a very well-read philosophical and political thinker, in addition to being a somewhat megalomaniacal composer. He consumed a vast quantity of philosophical literature and became obsessed towards the latter half of his life with the writings of Arthur Schopenhauer. And he's also, or was also, should I say, a prolific writer. So we know that his operatic works, or his Musikdrama, I should say, he wouldn't like me calling them opera. He disdained the term. They are Musikdrama, are heavily and explicitly influenced by the philosophy that he read. So as a sort of gateway here, this is probably the best way of doing it. Yes, there. I wanted to start with the idea of visual symbols of law and how they can carry meaning, because I think this is a good way in to the slightly more esoteric claim that I'm going to make, that music itself can convey legal meaning. I mean, these are, and you have my apologies for this, entirely Western symbols, but I think that's appropriate in the context, because the jurisprudential thought of Wagner, and I want to try to persuade you that that exists and it's really quite sophisticated, is very much aimed at the Western tradition of law and statecraft. So it's appropriate, I think, to see it within that context. And here, these are three, well, one very well-known symbol of law on the left-hand side here, which is Justitia, the Roman goddess of justice. And towards the right, we have Odin, the all-father of the Norse pantheon, or Wotan, as he appears in Wagner's tetralogy of operas, the Ring Cycle, which I'll be talking about today. And in the middle, there is a bull, which symbolizes El. El is the historical progenitor of the Abrahamic god. And throughout history, Western visual symbols of law have been used as ways to convey the majesty of justice, its strength, its solidity. In the case of Justitia, she holds a sword. El, often represented by a bull, is a symbol for strength and leadership. Odin, or Wotan, is depicted as a warrior who carries a spear. These are strong themes throughout the sort of general curve of Western history. And what I want to suggest to you is that what Wagner was trying to produce, and in my view succeeded in producing when he wrote the Ring Cycle, is something like a modern myth, an original creation, a mythological work that inhabits not only a literary, but also a sound world, a world of music. And it's through that creation of a modern myth that he conveys his views on statehood and the law. So before I get into the woods, so to speak, and explain to you what I take the ring to be about, I want to canvass a small methodological point. And this is that everything that I'm going to be talking about from now on really is about symbolism. And there's possibly quite a fine distinction, but an important distinction to be had between works of symbolism and allegorical works. Now, typically, we would understand an allegory to be a story we tell whose true meaning is located outside that story. So if I was telling you an allegorical story, the fiction I was giving you would somehow mirror something in the external world, and it would be a reference to that external thing. And you don't really understand what I'm doing when I'm giving you the allegory, unless you also understand that external thing or point of social reference. Symbolism, in the sense I'm going to be using it at least, is a little bit different. Symbolism is the idea that certain independent fictional ideas, entities like characters in a story, or places, or narrative arcs, or musical phrases, or at least that's what I want to persuade you today, have, in addition to their own artistic meaning, points of reference, usually multiple points of reference outside that meaning that they contribute to in some way. Now, I said the distinction between symbolism and allegory was pretty fine, and it is, but it's also important. And I think Roger Scruton explains it pretty well in the quotation I've got on this slide. So not a great book, The Ring of Truth. I don't agree with Scruton's interpretation of the Ring Cycle in many ways, but I think he gets this absolutely right. Scruton tells us in allegory, two stories are told. One, the explicit story involving character, action, place, and time. The other, the implicit or esoteric story concerning abstract ideas, cosmic forces, and moral doctrines. Symbolism is distinguished from allegory in that the symbol both expresses a meaning and adds to it, so that meaning and symbol are to a measure inseparable. Now, why is this important? It's important because allegorical stories rely on you already understanding their external point of reference. Great works of symbolism, including some of our oldest myths around the world, are designed to teach you about the subject matter they engage with. So an example I use in an earlier paper is the Greco-Roman myth of Heracles or Hercules, the very strong demigod who completed a series of impossible tasks to gain immortality. Well, that story is symbolic in relation to the fact that great power comes together with great responsibility. Hercules is the original Spider-Man, for those who are familiar with that phrase from Marvel's comics. Hercules and the myth of Hercules is designed to teach us something about the relationship between responsibility and power. And a symbolic tale, which is fundamentally what Wagner's Ring Cycle is, I would argue, is designed to teach us something. It is a positive contribution towards legal philosophical understanding. So one way of thinking about the material I'm going to discuss with you today is that it's one big, actually very, very big essay on the relationship between things like authority, law, the rule of law, power, coercion, dominance, and force. And I think from the legal point of view, there is great value to interpreting Wagner's works in this way, because when we do, it brings out and highlights for us a lot of key features of law that sometimes go underappreciated within legal philosophy. So, I'm going to start talking about some of the symbols in the ring cycle. So very, very briefly, for those not familiar, Wagner's Ring is what we call a tetralogy, so 4 connected musical works, 3 full-length music dramas, and they really are very long, of 3 acts each, and then 1 preliminary evening, which itself is a mere 2.5 hours long, right? So this is a very serious and ambitious connected set of works. And the ring cycle as a whole, that's what we refer to the tetralogy as, the ring cycle, or der Ring des Nibelungen, right, is fundamentally a story about the end of the world. Now, the actual story is very, very complicated, and it would take up all of my remaining time to simply relate it to you. But in a nutshell, it is a story about Wotan, Odin, for those of you who might be more familiar with the Norse rather than the Germanic terminology, the king of the gods, and his attempt to cling on to power and maintain order in a world that is effectively falling apart around his ears. The reason the world starts falling apart is that there is a dwarf called Alberic who seizes from the heart of the river Rhine, which is a river that runs through Germany and in Wagner's mythology is the center of all life in the universe. Wagner, of course, famously something of a German nationalist, seizes from the Rhine some gold, the Rhine gold. And out of the Rhine gold, Alberic the dwarf makes the ring. The ring cycle is called the Ring of the Nibelungen's ring. And the ring is a tool of immense power. And it allows Alberic to dominate his fellow dwarves, build an unstoppable army, and eventually, or so it transpires, attempt to take over the world. Wotan very early on succeeds in taking the ring from Alberic. But when Wotan takes the ring, Alberic puts a curse on it. All who possess the ring shall meet with despair and death. And then the drama follows the ring and Odin's attempts to reclaim it through successive generations of Odin's mortal children, right? Sigurd, his son, and then famously Siegfried, his grandson. Eventually, all of this fails. The ring is returned to the Rhine, actually by one of Wotan's other children, the Valkyrie Brunhilde, and Wotan's castle burns, the Rhine floods, and everything is reset. The beginning, the natural state, which the curtain first rises on the first preliminary act. So it's effectively a story about Ragnarok in the Norse myth, but it's told through a very modern lens because all of these characters are far more empathizable from at least the modern European/Western point of view Odin is very much, or Wotan is very much a political figure. He has created order in the world through contracts. These contracts are etched upon his spear haft, and he maintains his rule through this sort of unnatural equilibrium of drawing relationships between those around him to sort of create a sort of Hobbesian peace. Now, within this drama, there are certain symbols that I want to focus on just to illustrate some of the points I alluded to earlier on. And the first of these are Wotan's spear and his castle, Valhall, or Valhalla, if you're more familiar with that term. And these two symbols, I think, particularly musically, convey certain ideas about law. Because one way of understanding Wotan's role in the myth is as a symbol of law and the state. So in addition to being a political figure and an actual god in the story, Wotan is intended to symbolize a lot of things about contemporary European statescraft and lawmaking that Wagner would have seen when he was composing and writing these works. Now, as I said, I want to focus on two elements here, the spear and Valhall, the fortress that Wotan builds. Now, possibly the best way for me to illustrate exactly why I think that there is legal symbolism to be found in the music, as well as in the tale, the libretto, the text, the poetic text of the opera, is to just show you the music. So I've got the score on the slide here, but for those of you who can't read music, I've also got it for us to listen to, and hopefully the tech works. But fundamentally, or so I've argued elsewhere, the musical score that represents certain elements connected to Wotan in the myth carry with them distinct and fragmented meanings about different aspects of the concept of law. The spear, I say, represents authority, rule by law. And I hope to show you exactly why in just a second. The fortress, Valhall, symbolizes instead the ideal of law, or the rule of law, and is, to that extent, more concerned with a natural law type ideology. I'm going to jump straight in and show you the music. This is the spear. Or at least I'm going to try to. Bear with me. I'm going to make this easier for myself. This doesn't appear to let me edit it. Is there a problem here? Oh, Norman, that's closed down, I'm afraid. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is just move it. Yeah, I want to move it to one side so that I can more easily access the, maybe it's in download still. I must have closed it by mistake. Yeah. I basically want to drag the box so that I can, doesn't seem to want to let me edit it. That's fine. I'm sure
I'll try to, but you just want to hear the spear first.
Exactly. Right, I see. Okay, not to worry. Not sure what's happened there. Okay, perfect, okay. Apologies, folks. My fault for messing with the technology. Because it jumps onto the other one the second that you're... Okay, that'll do, perfect.
I'll help you with things.
Perfect, yeah, so if we can play the spear, that would be great. Maybe if we just click on the thing itself. That would... Okay. So hopefully that played for our friends on Zoom as well. All good? Yes.
No.
Oh, did we not share the? Yeah. Okay, well, I think I'll press on regardless. Okay, so a couple of things about this musical progression. So it's a downward progression, and sonically to that extent represents the spear itself with the tip pointing down. But insofar as it does that, it also indicates the act of commanding or exercising practical authority. And elsewhere, I've argued that this aspect of Wotan's personality, the spear, dictates a somewhat positivistic understanding of law in the sense of legal positivism. So the idea that law is the factual exercise of political authority over subject individuals. Now, it's interesting that the spear also appears in the drama. The performer who plays Wotan carries it around, but in the story, he never at any point attacks anybody with it. He uses it only to issue commands that are then automatically followed. So it has this explicitly normative element, and I think you can hear that in the music that Wagner uses to represent the spear. Now, something about this musical phrase I should also say, for those not familiar with the way Wagner composed, is that the excerpt that I've given you here is what's called a leitmotif. So it is a short musical phrase that is designed to carry meaning within a much larger and more complex score. So whenever the spear features in the drama, the spear motif will play in the orchestra. And it will be conveyed in the music alongside other themes, which will interact with it to construct complex meaning. So in a later opera, when Wotan's spear is broken, the leitmotif for spear is played alongside the leitmotif for freedom and destruction. So Wagner uses the musical score to communicate things that are not explicitly mentioned by the characters on the stage in their sung and spoken words. So I think the symbol of the spear, to that extent, is quite a straightforward illustration of there being legal meaning in the score. I want to play something else for you now, though. The theme for the fortress, Valhall, which I think is a little bit more subtle. Now, just listen to this to start with, and then I can talk about it a little bit. Now, in addition to being a very beautiful phrase, I think that's one of my favorite musical phrases ever, actually. Valhall is both an extremely philosophically interesting and I think generally rather underappreciated piece of the music. Most philosophers writing on Wagner's Ring, and there are quite a few of those actually, no legal philosophers though, as far as I know, I'm the only one, tend to treat Valhall as just a bit of the background to the story. It's a fortress. This little phrase plays whenever the fortress is referenced. And when they do analyze it, they tend to analyze it in terms of the pomp and ceremony that surrounds political power. And just listening to it again, I think you can see why. There is definitely something deliberate, dignified in this musical progression, right? But I think there's a lot more there in addition to simple pomp and ceremony. A few things. This is in the major key. So it is designed to convey a feeling of lightness, upliftingness, but also stability and solidity. In the baseline of the progression, there are also ties that carry the notes through and underline this sense of stability and permanence. You will also note that when the musical phrase ends, it ends in a very similar position to where it began, such that it gives an almost cyclical or self-sustaining impression. My thesis, specifically in relation to this, is that all of that was deliberate. Because what Wagner is trying to do here, and I think has largely succeeded in doing, is rendering the idea of the rule of law or legality into musical form, at least as the Western tradition understands the rule of law and legality. It is designed, the rule of law in the Western tradition, and again, I'm generalizing here across a lot of different philosophical schools, but I think most would broadly agree with this. It is designed to secure permanence and stability in governance. It is designed to uplift and ensure dignity. It is also designed to be self-sustaining, closed, independent. It is the source of authority. It doesn't look outside itself for authority. And Wagner, it seems to me, is trying to do all of this within a few bars of leitmotif. Listen to it again and see if you agree with me. This is a very different audible symbolism from the spear, which is also a symbol of law. I think the sophistication here in Wagner's thought is, if we accept the thesis that I'm arguing for and see both of these things as an auditory or a sonic representation of what law is at some fundamental level, Wagner has quite cleverly put into his music a central tension, possibly a necessary tension, within the concept of law itself. The spear tip pointing down is almost an aggressive sound. It is about dominance, control, and a single directional from ruler to ruled. And that is an essential element of Wotan's character, and therefore the symbol of law as it exists within Wagner's myth and his sound world. But at the beginning of the ring cycle, Wotan is desperate for the completion of the fortress of Valhalla. It's his primary goal. Before he learns about the existence of the ring, this is his single objective. So why does a god with so much directive power aim at the construction of this fortress? I've argued that it's because without something like the ideal of law, the idea of law as dominance or law as control lacks a normative foundation and therefore doesn't have anything to back up its authoritative demands. Remember that the spear is never used as a weapon. It's not a symbol of force. Wagner symbolizes force through other means in the operatic work. Wotan is effectively impotent without this fortress because it's the fortress that gives him the source of his authority. And if that interpretation is correct, it tells us something quite interesting about Wagner's view of law, which is although law is about control and has an element of social facticity to it, it is always necessarily in search of an ideal type of itself. Law as command or domination is always in search of some ideal of the rule of law or legality to underpin. So it's an idea in central tension with itself. There you go, a little bit of the spear just to send us on to the next slide. So this is where we get to in terms of the libretto as well. So you can see here, I put a couple of excerpts on the slide from the text of the opera as well as the music. These just go to emphasize the fact that the spear, that authority, is not a force-based idea for Wagner. and that it's connected to instead the idea of direction or command. So in scene 2 of the Rheingold, which is the preliminary evening, the first, that short 2.5-hour musical work, Wotan says at one point, "Hold you hothead, nothing by force, all bonds abide by my sacred spear, strike not a single blow." And then in the same scene, another character, one of the giants, says to him, "What is this? What? Breaking your word, betraying our trust, what your spear spells, is it mere sport, all those runes for trust and treaties?" So the giant is holding Wotan to the treaties written on the shaft of the spear. So, I mean, this just goes to underline, I think, what's already evident in the music. And for Wagner, music was the location of meaning before text. So that just goes to underline, I hope, the argument that I've put to you in relation to that so far. The same, I think, is true in relation to the fortress. So in the same preliminary evening, the Rheingold, Wotan says when he enters the fortress with the other gods, "Hail, fortress, to you, never more dread and care. Follow me, wife, let Valhall harbor us both." When I first read this in the score, I found myself wondering, well, exactly what is this god running from, that he's experiencing dread and care? It is the ring and the dwarf Alberic, but I think it's also something internal to himself. He's running towards the fortress because he's in desperate need of an ideal to ground his project of bringing law and order to the world. That, in the original conception, is what the fortress was meant to give him. All right, I'm a little conscious of my time here, so I'm going to move on to a couple of other symbols that I want to look at. First and foremost, the ring itself. Now, Wotan created his spear, Alberic created the ring. Both are tools, in a sense, for them. Wotan uses his spear to command, and you've seen how that works within the music as well as within the story. Alberic uses the ring to dominate, coerce, and control. When Alberic wears the ring, he has command of the entire underworld, effectively. And if he holds it up, people have to do his will. So the ring is a very, very complex symbol within the overall story of Wagner's work, and it symbolizes a number of different things. So first and most straightforwardly, it symbolizes coercion and dominance itself. But it also symbolizes, as George Bernard Shaw argued, the monetary economy and the advent of capitalism as a means to control people. We can also see in the way that the ring is used, the idea of ethical pollution and the subversion of humanity. As such, pretty much everything to do with this ring is horrible and negative. And yet all the characters in all 4 of Wagner's connected musical works are seeking it desperately. They want to have control of it for themselves. I just want to play you the ring's leitmotif, and possibly you'll see exactly what Wagner tried to capture within this music and why it's such a sinister symbol within the myth. Unpleasant, isn't it? It's in the minor key. It has a more broken tempo. It's not as solid and stable as Valhall. But those of you who are familiar with listening to music of this type might have noticed something about the chord progression. It's the same chord progression as Valhall, but it's inverted. And this is, I think, a stroke of not only musical, but also philosophical genius. Remember, Valhall was the ideal that Wotan was originally seeking. So this god of law and order, right, was originally seeking the ideal of the rule of law. The musical inverse of this ideal is the ring. It's the symbol of dominance and control. And so the dwarf Alberic, who effectively stands in the symbolic role of a tyrant, is the counterpoint of Wotan. But Wagner's not doing something as straightforward as saying, well, the opposite of law and light and stability and strength is domination and terror and tyranny. By making the chord progression the same, and by linking the two characters so closely in the narrative, my claim is that Wagner is effectively saying, look, if you want to understand law properly, you need to understand that it's both of these things. So the ring is as much a symbol of law as the spear or Valhalla is, but it's the darker side of law. It's the destructive capacity that law has, the corrupting capacity, control when used for its own sake rather than when oriented towards the common good or towards peace. In fact, in one of the later operas in the cycle, the Valkyrie, Wotan actually refers to himself as light Alberic. And when he talks about the dwarf, he calls him dark Alberic. So the character of Wotan explicitly in the text of the opera renders them equivalent sides of one coin. And this, as I say, I think is a philosophical masterstroke by Wagner. And there is something interesting as a methodological point that I wanted to highlight. When we as legal academics write stuff about the nature of law, we are constrained by argumentative form. So we have to have a thesis about what law is. We have to pursue that thesis through argument, defend it through counter-argument, and then we end up with, generally speaking, one part of the true or complete picture because we have taken a certain argumentative route. The composer and the librettist is not bound by argument in the same way. Wagner can put both of these truths about law into his score and let them play out in the context of a myth without needing to construct an argument about them. He can simply put them in front of you and say, here are two equally valid meanings of law, which each carry conflicting conceptual and moral implications that have a different sort of politics surrounding them both. And I'm just going to leave it there for you. And there is a sense in which, I think, that is more philosophically informative than a worked through argument. Because although, obviously, it can't prove anything, it is capable of suggesting far more. Because whereas ambiguity is a weakness in an argument, in a work of symbolism, ambiguity can be a strength because it allows for layers of interrelated and sometimes conflicting meaning. Now, I was also going to show you maybe actually the slide will play the giants itself. Don't worry, Norman. I don't think I've got time for the giants, but it might be when I click next, it just plays it. So the giants, very simply, are symbols of force in the myth. And if it does play it, you'll probably see why. That's I don't know why. Trust me, the actual music is not as confused as that. I don't know why it was playing it 3 times on top of each other. I'll just do it for you. The Giants theme goes dum dum da dum 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 da dum. That's it. It's an auditory simulation of physical power and brute strength, and that is the role the giants play within the symbolism. The giants, and this is another philosophical masterstroke, I think, build Valhalla for Wotan. So even on the light side of the coin, even if we're not talking about Alberic and the ring, force is a necessary component for creation of legal order. So when you put all of these things together, I think you have quite a complex picture of what law is, and it forms a necessarily contested idea, right? There are internal tensions within the concept that cannot be easily resolved. This is conveyed through the music in a way it couldn't be straightforwardly conveyed through prose, I think. And Wagner puts the ambiguity in front of you and lets you resolve it for yourselves if you can. The actual myth doesn't resolve it. There is no happy ending to the ring cycle. Wotan eventually dies. He burns alive in Valhalla. The spear is shattered in his hands at that point, and he actually uses the spear shaft himself to fuel the fire that burns him. The ring is eventually swallowed back up into the River Rhine, where it came from. The curse on the ring is broken, and to that extent, it's a happy ending. But all that happens is we're returned to the natural pre-legal state. And it's not like Wotan didn't have a reason to bring us out of that state. This world, don't forget, is filled with dwarves and dragons and giants and pretty dangerous things stampeding around, creating chaos. So the ending to the story itself is quite ambiguous. And this work is still to be done, but I think a complete account of how Wagner sees law, a complete Wagnerian jurisprudence, if you like, would explore that ambiguity and explore the question of, well, law can be bad for us, but maybe it's a necessary evil. And how should we navigate that necessity and understand it? Okay. I'm going to end there because I'm conscious that we are probably running out of time. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that was interesting, and apologies that there was a little difficulty with the music there. I did anticipate something like that. It's the problem of embedding MP4 files in a presentation, but hopefully you got the sense of it anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, for a really interesting and fascinating presentation.